Did you give me the mark, Rob? Was that good? Rob, was that good? Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to our May 10th Ad Hoc Boundaries Committee meeting. I am joined today with my fellow colleagues, and we've got a small group of people with us in the room today. Rob is going to give some information for those people that are joining us online if you want to ask a question. And then we'll go around the room and introduce, well, we'll start with my colleagues and then we'll go around the room starting with Ms. Phyllis and introduce ourselves. And if you wouldn't mind stating your name and your affiliation to the district, even if it's just citizen and voter, please share your neighborhood and then we'll begin.
Ian Coates, parent at Pleasant Ridge Montessori and Clark Montessori.
Hello kids, Mount Auburn Community Development Corporation, Taft Elementary, and a 40-year volunteer in Cincinnati Public Schools.
Carolyn Jones, board member.
Kareem Moffitt, board member.
Eve Bolden, board member.
Jeremy Goldhue, Chief Information Officer.
Donnie Williams, Vice Mayor Silverton.
Darling Coulter, citizen Silverton.
My friends, when you speak, just make sure that you speak into the microphone and move the green light on for the rest of them.
All right, well, we actually have a couple of items on this particular agenda that were carryovers from the last meeting that we had, which was actually just about a week and a half ago. Did any of my colleagues want to say anything prior to starting in reflection to the meeting before we kind of go on?
Reflections of
To our last meeting, yes, ma'am.
Oh, I would.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if it's specific to that meeting, but just trying to get prepared for this, recognizing that this was a special meeting that we called because we had a pretty intense meeting last time. It just reminded me, just looking at the agenda and maybe the fact that we had talked about sunset, just reflecting on all the information that's going to help drive our recommendations. And for me, and hopefully we can talk about that at some point, but for me, I think it's going to take some time for me to kind of absorb all of that, digest it, to come up with recommendations. And I would hope, and I don't know, I'm not making a recommendation or anything. I just thought I'd put that out there. There's a lot of ton of stuff, all good information. I appreciate, I've looked at all the charts and all that, but to really dissect it the way I want to come up with reasonable recommendations, I think is gonna be hard for us, at least hard for me. I'll speak for myself. But it's good stuff. So I just wanted to remark on that. And last week was helpful because it helped put a couple other things in context.
Board Member Bolton, would you like to reflect? I'll give my reflection too, but go ahead.
Yeah, I thought last meeting was great. The interest demonstrated by Silverton was not surprising. Legacy school for sure. And I think you're going to see similar, not exactly alike, but similar kinds of responses from other schools as we move through this effort. I think we have to keep re-emphasizing for many of our school communities some of the issues. They're not larger, nothing's larger than the happiness and the success of each of our schools, but larger issues, whether it's about transportation or whether it's about costs or whether it's about having more access or whether it's about drawing lines and doing the programmatic things that would increase access and increase choice, quality choices for more of our families. I did recall that we did get, now we're not going to report on it today, but we did get a comment from one of the neighborhoods, citizen in one of the neighborhoods, talking in terms of why or how is it that certain parts of Madisonville were part of Pleasant Ridge Montessori, and suggesting that somehow Pleasant Ridge Montessori had done that recently. It dates back to the early 1980s. when indeed Pleasant Ridge was predominantly African American, and indeed there was moving of Caucasian neighborhoods, even within Madisonville, to the Pleasant Ridge boundaries to do more of a diversity. And I had gotten from a good friend the specifics and the dates, sort of when that happened. And it was not a surprise to me, but I felt relieved that whatever had happened that looked a little funny didn't happen on my watch. So you get, you wait for it. The vice mayor understands that too. It's like, well, I own it because it's our institution, but I didn't have a part to it. But I think it lends itself, that example lends itself to how we have to be careful how we message and how we talk about these things so that people are, who are very worried about many things. We have to be very clear on messaging, very sensitive and accurate as we move forward. So, and I do think, that right now there's been emphasis on the North Central corridor, which would be up Hamilton Avenue and Coleraine in that area. We've dealt with that. Now we're emphasizing, and we've dealt with West Side by the purchase of Mercy and moving it into Gamble, so we've been there. Now we're over on the east side, so to speak, and trying to address some of those issues on the east. Another piece I would say is that there has been an effort to move our neighborhood schools into a better position, a better competitive position, not only because of transportation, but because that's where we have, it's our history and our tradition. And that's where there's so much possible access that is not being used yet. But also, I think the whole idea that, again, as I'll say again and again, and I forgive me, committee members, we are no longer a district that has neighborhoods and magnets. That's not our identity anymore. It has been for almost 30-some years. It's a great idea, help save the district, create a choice, but we are in the midst of some sort of realignment of community discussion to figure out what it is, because we have multiple systems that we didn't have 30 years ago, whether it's our international schools, whether it's preschool, whatever it is. So just be aware, high schools of choice may or may not be something we can sustain. So there's lots of big choices, lots of big decisions to be made, and we need to keep our eye on as big a picture as we can and the success of our wonderful schools. But I would reflect on.
Okay, thank you. I'll just kind of add my 2 cents. I do agree with much of what you all have shared. I will say that one large takeaway that I received from the last meeting was the community engagement and the lack thereof in some parts of our neighborhoods and with our schools. The community, I think, is paying attention. Usually they say people don't pay attention until it impacts them, but I think we're experiencing something slightly different in that people want to offset some potential things that they have either seen historically or are fearful that they will happen. So I think that the community, I heard very loudly that the community was extremely concerned about some significant changes, but that they were also very concerned that their engagement wasn't what either it has been or they would like for it to be. So that was one takeaway. I do think that the pandemic was very clear that some things needed to change, and I think things needed to change before the pandemic, but it magnified inequities on a lot of other levels, and our boundaries and our systems of schools, as you described, is one of those areas that we need to take a look at. And I do not know if my colleague, Board Member Jones, was suggesting or making a recommendation to sunset, but I feel like there's just been an enormous amount of work that has presented itself that I think the board needs to be intimately involved in with the community. And I don't think that we need to sunset. I think our original intention was to get on here and talk about boundaries, and then with the audit that's done by the administration, I think that opened up, I don't want to say a Pandora's box because it sounds so negative, but I think it definitely presented other areas that we need to consider concurrently when we're talking about boundaries. In addition to that, transportation is super significant. So I personally feel like if the need is to sunset and then reopen, we could do that. But I don't think that the sunset is what the community is asking for. I don't think that to sunset right now is really in the best interest of the district. That is solely my opinion. Sure, I'll get to you one second. I just think that this is an opportunity for us to look at things in totality, but also in context with regard to corridors, what is in each corridor, what are the needs of academic, what are the needs of the schools within specific corridors, what are the transportation needs of those things, in addition to, and at the same time that the superintendent and her team are looking at programming audits. I just think this is the time to do that in tandem with the community. So that's kind of my takeaway last meeting. When you have a room full of people that are advocating for their students within those schools, and we had people at the meeting that don't have students in the district. So I just was reflective of the makeup of the people that came, what they shared, the passion that they shared it, and they utilized this forum to do that. I think that that's indicative of wanting to have more opportunity to engage. Board Member Jones.
Yes, thank you, Member Moffitt. It actually, in what I said in my reflections, I wasn't even thinking about the sunsetting piece. However, I do think that what I was saying in my comments was, in thinking about initially what brought this committee together, and it had to do with it, sort of the catalyst for it was transportation. And it, you know, and around that, recognizing that this recognizing that the boundaries issue has been a historical issue, I think the more we've opened up the conversation, the more we discover about how we move forward, how we want to move forward. And I think it's a lot of work. My only concern, and I'm not, you know, whether we sunset or not, it's, you know, that's not really my issue. But I do feel like that this is the time where we should probably give some recommendations to the board, to the full board, and have the full board respond. And then we come back to kind of, I don't want to say narrow the scope, but hone in on what it is this committee can do moving forward if in fact we don't sunset. Because what I kind of feel like is that it could go on forever. I mean, there's a lot of meat in this. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of change, and it's important things. Just want to make sure that that this entire initiative is something that we can realistically take on, because there are other things we still haven't talked about. I mean, we really haven't touched on, I mean, we've talked about transportation, but we really haven't talked about transportation. It also has financial implications. And so I'm just saying, not necessarily sunset forever, but sunset in the sense of, let's come up with a set of recommendations, like the meat of what we're talking about, the crux of what we're talking about, present it to the full board, get some feedback, and then we can come back and decide how we're going to move forward. Because otherwise it's not an ad hoc committee, it's just a regular committee. Attendance boundaries committees for us, but.
Well, I definitely agree with you on some points. I think that we took if I look at this in slight totality, we took a turn with the audit from the administration, because we were kind of going in one direction, and then the recommendation from administration was to pause for the program audit. And we did that in November, December. So I think that I do think we have enough information and data to come back with a lot of things that are action items. In fact, we actually had 3 really great action items that we are still waiting for information from administration. So I don't know what the process is, and for sure, inform me, if it would be to sunset and then come back, or is it to just make recommendations until the committee has done its work and then maybe recharge it with additional things at the recommendation? Yes, ma'am.
I think we have the makings of actual, I don't know if it's unanimity or consensus, but my druthers right now would be that we, and I think putting together the document that would be the form of informing the board of all the stuff we've covered, because they're unaware of all the things that we've covered.
Sure.
And it's just been remarkable, I think. I really appreciate administration, particularly appreciate Jeremy's work on this. And also the fact when we start to put together those folks from the community that have been here. We had, a full house the last time we met, but we've had a number of schools make presentations, a number of representatives. I think we have to build that in, but my suggestion would be that we prepare that report for the board for probably, certainly not this month because it's May and it's graduation time, but no later than June, and have them be given as much documentation as possible, and that by that June, we would be able to even give them what we're not calling recommendations, but I think we've evolved in consensus, so I think it was there. I would suggest that we not ask or say we're gonna sunset until, and I don't know if the people jump out of their chairs, but I think December 31st, because we have the continuation of our current committee. After that, there'll be other board members, possibly because of an election. But I think while we've got the history, we've got the working relationship with the administration and the community, and we are doing this, I think we should say that we recommend that it not be sunset till then, where all of our committees get sunset, and then it can be reconvened or not, or whatever, with the current or different membership. But I think we owe the board and a full report. And I think that not only that, but we need the board to tell us in June or whenever, after they've had some time to think about it, how do they want us to proceed, very widely or more narrowly or what have you. So I think that's where I am, but I think we need to prepare a report and all the documentation for our colleagues, and then also say we'd like to continue our work through the calendar year. And that's what because I think we've got that much work to do. And I think that makes sense because calendar year is when things change anyway.
Sounds good. I'm just taking notes, everybody. I'm sorry. I'm sharing this with you, Ms. Phillips, so you'll see it. Okay, any further, did you like that, agree, good thoughts?
For the most part, yeah.
And I think that just so that everybody knows that we have one really overzealous committee member who's already prepared her summation. And then we have two other ones who have read it. So we will work on getting our thoughts and our ideas together for the report. And then once that and it will be public. So once that we get that together, Ms. Phillips will post it for the June meeting. June? Board member
Sometime
Jones?
in June, that'd be great.
June board meeting?
We do it? Is that too fast? We don't know about July or
Well, can we decide that next
later.
week? And the reason why I'm saying is I don't know if June is too early. It might be too early. There's a lot of stuff here, and if superintendent is in here, she really has to add to the report. And Jeremy, I mean, so.
It'll take us
I don't
one
know.
meeting and put all the documents that we've listed together.
Right. It's gonna take me that long to review them. I tell you.
So,
Wait till school is out when I don't have a baby.
Yeah.
so what I'm hearing is, just for the community, just so you all know, we have a board meeting June the 5th. So we're not anticipating that meeting, but maybe June the 26th.
Mhm.
Does that sound
Yeah.
about right? Okay, so I'm just,
That'll be the vote on the budget.
yeah, that'll be ooh,
It'll be a happy-go-lucky meeting.
I don't know if it's gonna be happy. Definitely. Proposal, I'm just gonna put here, proposal,
And what, if I might ask,
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
What, if you have your calendar out, what's the first week? In July, we tend to sunset, the full board. I mean, we only have
Mhm.
one meeting.
Yes, ma'am.
I wouldn't even be opposed to pushing this there.
July?
It depends. I mean, I don't know.
I don't think that that's a bad idea. I do hope, though, that some of the things we might be coming up with could impact some aspects, not giant ones, but would be impacting the coming school year. I mean, we've already made
that's
some
true.
of
That's
the
true.
decisions along the way. So if there's sort of this this preface kind of report, and then promise that there will be a larger report. Because I think there's some anticipation that some of these things, as people mentioned last time we met, does this impact enrollment? Does it impact budget? Does it impact planning for even the transportation effort? So,
In all honesty, I think we could get something by June 26th, because the reality is everything that that we would be putting in the report has pretty much already been presented by Jeremy. You've done the maps 100 different ways with the thick packet, and you've given us a summation for PRM or for Silverton. And so we may have a couple of extra questions that might require a little bit more research. I think based on just what we've already talked about, like I think last meeting we talked about, hey, Jeremy, could we look at it this way? And you said, yeah, we could just tweak it. I don't think it would take that much. I'm anticipating good stuff because you're good like that. But I think we could let's set a date for June 26th. I'm going to take off July 17th because I think we can do it by then. I'm really saying that out loud for myself.
So just curious, is the plan to include all of the data that has been given us, or we're going to decide which data?
What do you think?
I tried to put together as order as I could the data that I think would be most essential for the board. That probably is not all inclusive, and some of that, based upon everybody's recommendation, can be eliminated. But it bears witness that the visual helps us. It bears witness that we not try to explain things that can be read. Because the translation it gets kind of weary as you do that. So, but again, even just putting all this together will be difficult, let alone the time to. And I guess next time we'll have to be thinking in terms of what the recommendations from the consensus actually is.
So unfortunately, we don't have this electronically, but we can, you want to pass it around so people can see what we're talking about? I don't know. I mean, we can pass it around and show you what we're talking about. I hate for people to be talking about something you can't see. It's just really a summation of, and just to give you, these are just some of the things that we want to put in a report. So it was like, what our charge is, how that charge came about. So a historical perspective, a list of dates that we've met, historical reference.
What it would look like if we put all this together.
If we put all this together. So it'll be multi pages. Got 20 items on here. You can see my face. I don't know if you see it's got 20 items on here. So it's just to summarize what we've heard, what we have received, and then make a recommendation. So if we do have people that have sent us information. So if you do want to formalize it, we can put that in there as well. You had a question. Ms. Gibbs, keep trouble too.
I think you actually answered it. I was wondering if we had anticipation of any of the action pieces that would be approved by the rest of the board if they would take place at the beginning of the school year. I don't think you guys kind of answered that.
That's the hope. Just to give you a small summation, one of our action items from the board meeting, inform administration that engagement is a concern at PRM and Silverton communities and schools, and ask about plans to engage those communities before the end of the school year. So as an example, we would ask the administration what the plan is for engagement for that, with those two particular communities, because that has been a specific ask. Is there a calendar that she or may have her team present for the rest of the academic year? So that's what that would hopefully look like. Okay, anybody else? You can sit at the table, you don't have to sit in the back, you sure? All right,
Yeah, thank you.
you're welcome. Okay, anyone else? Board Member Jones, okay, so let's move on to our agenda. And we've got first up, transportation requested data. Jeremy, is that you?
You want me to jump in? Sure. So real quick first, just to start with a little bit of a revisit to what we've looked at in the past, just to recapture some of that. We've established in our conversations, several months ago, at least a baseline estimate as to what we can look at as a per pupil kind of cost. So as we look at some of the acute transitions that we've talked about, it gives us a way to identify the number of students that potentially could move and come up with some kind of a potential transportation cost. So that was really important for us, establishing that baseline cost that we could do some estimates on. Around those specific acute kind of situations we looked at the Winton Hills, Pleasant Hill, and Mount Airy in the northwest area. In terms of the boundary lines there, the students that overlap from the walking boundaries as well as those that live along the very edge of the boundary and potentially are attending or getting transportation at one of the other opposing schools, primarily Pleasant Hill or Mount Airy, and what those costs look like if those students were to receive transportation to a different school. Then we also looked at the Winton Hills area around Winton Terrace in the Garden View area directly north of the school, and looked at the number of students who are currently receiving transportation from Winton Terrace to Pleasant Hill, as opposed to going to the school literally, within the walking boundary that they're living in.
Come on, Jeremy. Where are you? Are you on this page?
Oh, I'm sorry.
On this page, it's okay. I just wanted to
I'm
direct people.
so
I'm
sorry.
lost, so they might be too.
April 27th report, the one that we had last week on page 3.
Okay, is that this one?
It's the thicker of the two.
Okay, page 3. Does everybody have a copy?
Provided transportation.
Carol, you-
No, he only.
No, I have a few extras.
Okay.
Yes, it is, and you can put it up. No, I have one extra. But
I'm gonna just put it over here on this side for these ladies to share. Thank you.
So if I have it online, I can give mine to somebody else.
Yep. Slide 3, Rob. So excited, I just jumped right ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I love it. I was just like, where you at? That's okay.
Maybe.
Maybe.
I know.
I believe she would be in alignment with my methodology for accomplishing an estimate around these numbers. How's that
There we
sound?
go. There we go.
There we go. So yeah, under the provided transportation data is where we were talking around basically a summary of what we've talked about in the past. And just to finish that, the last part is we did talk about the potential of adding 7th and 8th grade to Ethel Taylor, South Avondale, and Frederick Douglass, which came out of our discussion around the initial consensus items from the program audit. Realizing, I think, since then we've had a little bit of a shift of our focus in talking around the middle school years, but that was something we looked at immediately after that, just as an example, again, of an acute situation.
Repeat what you just said. We said the potential to do what to those schools?
Add 7th and 8th grade.
Okay.
Okay. So what is outstanding that administration is aware of and still working towards are 2 specific questions. One is around the impact of a transition in a potential change to the policy of transportation relating to, currently we provide transportation options for students who live within a neighborhood boundary within a bank school. And the request was that we look at the impacts of if we were to allow or promote the transportation of students living in a neighborhood boundary to a different neighborhood school. So essentially,
Call that the month.
and essentially, what you're looking at there in a whole would be every student could choose where they wanted to go. Depending on what criteria that we would have to put around that for which neighborhood boundaries they could participate in.
Which page?
Page 3,
Okay, you're still there.
on the right side.
Okay.
So that is still an outstanding request. The second one, and similar, is an analysis of what the transportation impacts and costs would be when we and if we go to a corridor model. So for both of those, obviously, the past several months, administration resources has primarily been dedicated to aligning our transportation for next school year, as well as trying to finish the year strong. With some of these changes, they have a strong domino effect. That once we determine the corridor outline and what exactly are the list of schools that are in each area, it would be much easier for us to do that work. Not easier, but it'll be more possible for us to do that work up in terms of what the impacts would look like. As we keep, until the last meeting, we were still looking at the options. You can see on the board to the right where we moved several schools from the west to the central and one from the central to the east. So as we continue to make those changes, we want to finalize those before we can do that, as well as get the resources and look at establishing some policies, or at least criteria, potential policy changes or criteria for what the neighborhood to neighborhood would look like, short of just making it fully open choice. So those are the outstanding items that administration has for transportation, as well as what we've covered so far.
Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate this a lot. I feel pretty strongly that the Pleasant Hill, Winton Hills, and Mount Airy, I think that should be a done deal. I really do, not just because of the savings, but because it was a break of trust, the way those neighborhood boundaries got drawn in the first place, because you were dividing neighborhoods and still calling their schools neighborhood schools. So I have a high priority, not just because of my love of College Hill and the whole central corridor. I think that makes complete sense. And I know within the Winton Hills community, they've always wondered why they have to pass the school that is next door to them to go up the hill to be in Pleasant Hill. And so I have that's a big priority for me, of those three schools. And I think it would possibly impact Chase down the road. Literally down the road from Mount Airy. That's a priority. And the corridor piece, it would be great if the corridor piece could impact transportation. But I don't think it does until for a couple of years, whereas this first priority might could do it very quickly. The corridor piece for me is about having the same choices within each corridor. It's an academic thing. It's kind of from the audit that the administration did, so that you, in your central and your east and your west, if you wanted Montessori, you've got Montessori. If you wanted a K-8 building, regardless of which corridor you were in, you could have that choice. Or if there's whatever some of the other choices are, international schools or what have you. So for me, I'd like to be thinking, and I think the last move, I think it was Carolyn that mentioned about pulling Walnut and SCPA out of that corridor, those corridor numbers, and you've done that. And I think like you said, you've changed a couple of I believe there's some consensus among the three of us, and I believe too with the superintendent, that's a good way to do it based upon your enrollment pool. And I think it's a great way to do it from a programmatic choice piece too. I think we should, really concentrate on that. If that could somehow impact transportation as early as next year, that'd be icing on the cake. But for me, it's about programming. And I think it also starts to lend itself to our discussion about high schools of choice and how much we can afford that or not afford that. And it would help us determine which of the magnets are regional magnets, like our Montessori East and West, or which ones are citywide, like our international students run AWL and AMI. And so I think it makes sense to have a foundation of some consensus to even use as we move forward. But I like the new alignment of those schools up there. And I like doing something about North Central. from the get-go, because that actually was supposed to happen as a result of the creation of CANS, which, by the way, CANS, it needs an addition to the building.
They gotta stand in line. A lot of kids do.
Well, and a parking lot. But I'm just saying that we need to cash in when indeed big strategic decisions or tactical decisions like that actually reap the benefits. We gotta seize the moment. That's where I am about the 3 and also about the North Central piece.
As you can tell, Eve eats and sleeps this stuff. She
Yeah.
has it in her.
She's been like sitting at the bit. I do see you. Hold on one second. She's got this like on lock.
Do it in German.
I just I have questions about I really wasn't thinking about it from a programming standpoint. I was really only thinking about it from a transportation standpoint. So I feel as if we could be more efficient with transportation if we based our transportation on corridors. I wasn't thinking about programming. I was thinking about, because, and the reason I wasn't thinking about programming is because I think that's how we think about it, but families don't always think about it that way. And they are our students. We have a very high transient population of students. We have to realize that we are basing this on a historical model of families that stayed in one neighborhood so that their kids could go to that school and finish out that particular grade and then move. That is not the type of families that we have that dominate our district. I met way too many students who have been to their 3rd school in this 1 year. And it's not a small number. And yes, and we're not the only ones that are dealing with this, but we are dealing with this, and we keep having models that don't allot for that transient population. So I love the idea in theory. I love you and for that. I know she's got to come back.
I got a big comeback. It's
Yes,
the same
ma'am.
reason that we standardize curriculum at great effort and great cost is because of that mobility. I think even as the Ford Foundation came out and used us as one of the biggest examples of our kids are everywhere
Yes.
and moving. I think the corridor thing, if you have the same programmatic choices in your east and your west and your central corridors, then when our children and our teenagers move, they can move from choice to the same choice, the same options, and that would be useful. It might be too generic, but
I completely agree with you.
so
I was just saying that
mobility is challenges.
I just want, let me just finish my sentence. I just think that, or my thought, I think that I was only thinking of corridors for transportation. I wasn't thinking about it for programming because in my mind, kids are so transient. Let us look at how transportation is impacted. If you don't have to go across the district east to west, maybe that would have a positive impact on the cost and the ability for routes to be more efficient if it were a corridor model. That's what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking about it from
I
a
love
programming
you for
standpoint.
that.
So
I'm
that's
just going to add a point that I agree with what's been said, but I also think we're forgetting. You had your hand up. I also think that we're forgetting a real thing that is a cultural dynamic, and that is that kids go where their friends go.
Mhm.
And so that's very important in terms of mobility, in terms of transportation. I agree with Dr. Moffitt in terms of looking at the efficiency in transportation based on corridors being, what did you say? I can't remember. We were talking about programming and then cost and all of that. But I think if there's the availability of programming across the corridors that where people can access the choices that they want, it's going to take a while. It's going to take a bit of a transition before people get it and that
Absolutely.
they decide to go within their corridor. But I actually like the corridor concept. I do. I like the corridor concept. But yeah, so it really is a cultural shift.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I've got two issues now. One is that children don't just learn from a book, they learn from their friends. So if you're constantly moving children, different groups of people. But I was going to say is, I think there's three Montessori elementary schools and a feeder high school in the East Corridor. And there are two Montessori elementary and a feeder high school in West. There's only one Montessori in Central and no feeder to high school.
Oh, okay.
That's concerning, because it doesn't mean that, the programming is.
Then you're off your
Yeah.
corridor.
We call that an action plan.
Yeah.
Say that again. Say that again. What did you say?
What?
No, I was saying, Carol, say that one more time. I want to try to.
So there's three Montessori elementary schools in the East Corridor with one feeder, Clark. And there is two Montessoris in the West Corridor with a feeder to Gamble Montessori, and only one Montessori elementary in Central and no feeder to high school.
Yes, and that's why we need, as Melanie Bates said 6 years ago, we need a third Montessori high school, and it obviously needs to be in the Central Corridor. And you probably need to do without one of the other kind of non-descriptive magnets that might exist in the Central Corridor, and it becomes a Montessori. The most diverse schools we have, economically, racially, culturally, believe it or not, are our Montessori schools. And everything else, the segregation by race or by economics is an overwhelming kind of challenge. So yeah, it's by hook or crook, probably not because we ever planned it in this district, but when you look at some of the scores, the similarity actually works. Whether it's a K-12 in the East and a K-12 in the West, that's already there. But there's not really K-12 in the Central Corridor. But when you look at the Central Corridor, that's where you're going to find most of your heavily career-centered schools. Too. I don't know how that happened, but that's very convenient as we expand career paths, because you're only going across half of the district. Because you've got Taft, you've got Hughes, Aiken, and Woodward in the Central Corridor.
Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I
Just make sure you're on
wanted to
mic.
speak on that, Ian Coates, Montessori parent. I believe, I could be wrong, but I agree that obviously we need another Montessori high school central, but I believe right now that the Parker Woods feeds into Gamble. Yeah, so it is 3 and 3 technically right now, but obviously both high schools are not in the corridor system.
And it might be that it's taken us 4 years to get to happen because things are decided and then nobody enforces them, and that's not this administration, previous administrations. Where you make a decision, but nobody wants to do it, just like, the Silverton thing and what have you as well. But yeah, you might just be looking at your Montessori as being East and West, but for people that are living in the Central Corridor, we need probably another Montessori, whether that's college or fundamental or whatever it could be. That's one of the schools that's in the Central Corridor. It's a magnet, but. Oh, that's your action plans, Carolyn.
Well, I think honestly this is a prime example of how we go from one simple little topic to now we have a whole nother thing to talk about and add to the list. And it's like, well, we did start talking about Pleasant Hill, Winton Hills, and College Hill, and the reason why Board Member Bolton, for those people who are like a little confused, that's how we started the ad hoc committee, because at the time my kids were younger, we live in Avondale. Our neighborhood school is South Avondale, but they went to Pleasant Hill. We got no bus transportation because it was from neighborhood school to neighborhood school. And so we were having this conversation in policy, and I was like, no, you don't get it because I didn't get it. But if I had chosen to send my children to a magnet school from Avondale, they would have gotten it. That seems unfair because you're forcing people to choose magnet schools if transportation is your issue. You have to go to a magnet school for transportation. And that's unfair. Yes, ma'am.
Concern is that how the housing situation is impacting the transient nature of families right now.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just deciding they're not just you have parents that are working and they've been in long-term in their employment, but their housing situation has forced them to move. I had one parent, she was moved 3 times in 2 years. So she fought hard to keep her kids in the same school, but if it were quarter, from what little I know right now, then they could go to that school and stay with the continuity of being in the same school. I don't know if the other method offers that, but I think it really has to be looked at, the housing situation and how negatively that's impacting families and children's education, and how that can be helped based on transportation. And then, like, I think with the kids leaving, I'm really concerned about the kids leaving Silverton it was a magnet and they could get to Silverton because they had transportation because it was a magnet. Now we just ship them somewhere else, and that's just not good. And I'm speaking off of a life of we were as transient as you could possibly be when I was a kid. I went to 5 elementary schools, 2 high schools, 2 junior high schools. We were moving, not all the time because my mother stayed at the same job forever, but that's sometimes based on just what's happening in the community that the kids have nothing to do with. So continuity, and you all know that, you're the experts, that continuity is one of the most important things we give. So that transportation has to answer to that.
Thank you so much for
I'm
that.
supposed to talk now.
No, you're perfectly fine.
I don't know how open it is.
It's very open. You're perfectly fine.
I don't want to be.
I just want to add that at least my recollection is that the entire discussion, because the boundaries issue is a long-standing concern. It rolls back up because of the problems with transportation that we had. And so, but as everybody can see and hear, it blossoms into many of everything that are relevant to what everybody is saying. And it's such a huge issue or a challenge. And I don't see this as something that's going to happen in 1 year or 2 years, because I see it as a process. We just got to figure out, or prioritize what those processes are. I mean, when I think about equity and all of that, I mean, you essentially are speaking to that. Equity, we have to, that all factors into whatever decisions we make about what direction to go with. So, yeah, it's a lot. It's just a lot.
I think you hit it on the nose. I was going to just have Jeremy explain the corridors to you really, really quickly so that you could kind of get that. And then the other piece, which is an elephant in the room that I think we're not adding to this after you get the equity piece, not the corridor piece, is we only have we have regulations from the state that say we have to transport students when they're within X number of miles from their school. And we're saying, really, Board Member Bolton is keeping that conversation alive. We want it to be 1 mile, even though the state says it could be 2. So we're trying to be responsive to our population and be a little bit of caring, but it's costing us a lot of money, and we have a limited amount of money to do. Is it 2? It's 2. Is it 2 by the state?
2 by
the state, but we do 1. So I want Jeremy to just explain what our corridor model is for you and for everyone, so that they can kind
We
of.
moved it from 1.25, which is already wonderful from comparison to the state, to 1 last year in our policy. And we made that be the case also for high school. And that's part of the discussion about money and whatever, and versus, everybody knows where I'm about it being 1 mile messaging and walking school.
But it's still in this.
It's still in there.
Absolutely.
So just kind of give us a cursory view on what the corridor thought is.
Sure. So the corridor model came about from a little bit of history where we went through at one point we had quadrants for the city or for the district across the city. We moved to an east-west model. This is what we're currently under. And in looking at some of the challenges we've had, both and the members have gave great summations as to some of the things we've looked at, from the programmatic aspect as well as the geographic aspect and the transportation aspects across the district. It was an effort for us to create a series of boundaries across our entire district and the city that would allow us to look at almost in isolation to compare the three different natural segments of the city, which created the east, west, and central corridors. And across those, we looked at what the attendance boundaries currently are to align what enrollment and capacity we have at the schools in each of those corridors to be roughly equal to 1/3 of the district. So in the east, you have approximately 1/3 of our enrollment, same for the central, same for the west. Does that sound like a fair summation?
The only thing I'd add is just culturally, the city itself is divided that way. We've always seen our city as east-west, and the reality is if you live in that central corridor, some people call Freedom Way, the central corridor folks don't think of themselves as West Siders or East Siders, so it makes sense. And I love how Jeremy's done it based upon enrollment. And to the point about that Kareem makes about schools and choice, it's not just about all the work we've done in curriculum programmatically, but it's types of schools. There are types of schools you can choose in Cincinnati Public that other large public systems don't have, whether it's a PK8 or whether it's an IB on the east, but we don't have Westerwise. It's types of schools themselves. And that's why Carol and Kareem have brought up this middle school thing as much as they have. That would be a very historic, very strategic, big breakthrough if we start to reconfigure ourselves and have that as an option in all three. And having 3 of something is cheaper than having 4 of something. So that's why quadrants don't work very much anymore, because we can't afford 4. We can't have trouble affording 1 of everything.
But it also, I'm sorry, Carolyn, I'll see you one second. It also speaks to the needs of the community as they exist now. Middle schools, the reason why middle schools is important is because teachers are saying to us, the 7th and 8th graders in the high schools is not working in this model. And so we're trying to have conversations concurrently while we're already talking about programming, while we're already talking about transportation, while we're already talking about some of our buildings being underutilized. Let's have this conversation to be efficient on more than just one level. So if we have a building, which is how we started this conversation on our committee, if we have a building, and we do, where they are significantly under-enrolled, to me, in my mind, we didn't establish what significant is, but in my mind, if you're at 20% or, your population or less, I don't know if we have an official number, but if you are under-enrolled by like 20%, then you have space, and I don't want you to close, but let's look at what could be in that building. So that's we started talking about that, and then we did the program audit, and then that kind of shifted us. But that's part of the reason why we're ballooning up into being a huge conversation, because it makes sense to me to have these conversations here in one time, and then maybe we put some things on the burner, but we've looked at everything in totality, because now we can pick up the pieces that are most impactful. Yes, ma'am.
Do we know how much it would save if we went to the 2 mile?
I've asked that question. We don't really have that conversation because Member Bolton does not.
Knowing how, I'll take her on. It's all right.
Okay.
So, knowing how healthy walking is, and Mike Morosky walks 24 miles in the morning.
And do you see him here?
You're absolutely right. I will say the closest that we came to that, let me protect Jeremy. The closest that we came to that is in one of our reports, we had a presentation from the administration that said if we were to go up to, I think, 1.5,
Back to 1 1/4.
Was it 1 1/4? Okay, so if we were to go to 1 1/4, I know she knows this, it would be a savings of 1,200 students, was roughly 1,200 students, and each student is roughly $2,000. So you can do that math. That's just going down
a quarter of a
quarter of a
freaking mile. We went to 2. And, you know, I'll just throw this out, walking school bus. Well, but it's good for adult. Let Murosky do some of them.
It would be fine if all of our neighbors paid for the children to
Well,
walk in.
Yeah,
Well, I
Our teenagers weren't killing each other.
I hear you.
agree.
mean, this is, I have a real problem, spending all my life teaching in Wyoming, to walk 5 miles, you know, but even that's not safe. So it's,
You're right.
streets, hillsides for the little people, that's hard. I mean, I think the messaging, if we could get the city committed to giving us safe school zones of 1 mile, that they would commit, because, you know, by law, they went to put the signal stuff up or safety stuff up around high schools, unless there's a 7th and 8th grade in that high school. State law doesn't even say they have to have marked crossings.
Have you gone to talk to Mark Jeffries?
Well, we're gonna have, that's one of the reasons
That's
why
down the road.
we have our joint CPS city council meetings that we've only had one, but that was the point of that, because we cannot talk about food insecurity and housing insecurity in a silo. We don't deal with that. We deal with education. We need to have people at the table who deal with those conversations. And so that, to me, that makes sense. You have people, we have transient students. You need to talk about why they're transient and how they could get to the schools, and you have that conversation with people. Yes. So that we do have another one. We're trying to get it coming up in June. I see you. Yes, ma'am.
If the school is under-enrolled with the corridor idea, could it then be a K-8 school?
It could,
Yeah.
That could be one of the scenarios.
but we had them.
Yeah.
We had K-8 buildings before.
Well, I was thinking that Silverton, because we're so landlocked with the
Right.
boundary, we can't go to Deer Park, we can't go to Kenwood. I mean, we have so many schools within that area.
I think Jeremy had mentioned before about that expanding Silverton is more problematic than maybe expanding some other place. So, you know, PK or whatever, I mean, I know that the Madisonville folks have been talking for a few years about wanting a PK within Madisonville. And then that way your Schroeder is only, 9 through 12. So that would impact you guys. It's a wonderful opportunity.
And I want to say this, I am not a proponent of doing something district-wide just because, we decide, oh, let's just do this as a district. I think we should do it where it makes sense to do it. And unfortunately, we get into this, in my mind, conundrum of, okay, everybody has to be a K-12. No, they don't. It doesn't have to be everyone do the K-12 model. It could just be certain schools do the K-12, the K-8 model. Or maybe we just have one junior high. We talked about this, one junior high per corridor. We don't know what that needs to look like. That's where the administration comes in with the data. Yes, ma'am.
So speaking on what you said, the PRM's proposal was to hopefully allow an option. We don't want to change our boundaries. We want everyone who wants Montessori to get Montessori. But if there are families coming into our district who don't want Montessori, an option maybe within a 2-mile radius or whatever, if they are in Pleasant Ridge Montessori and Silverton. Right now, like if I personally live in Woodford and Pleasant Ridge, so I'm 1.1 miles away from Pleasant Ridge and 1 mile away from Woodford. So I would have the option to choose Montessori or Woodford. And I know there was a successful idea launched to both Silverton, the principal of Silverton and the principal of Woodford, in that John P. Parker did not have a favorable response, but I don't think that they fully understood what we were proposing. So I don't know if that.
That's important.
Well, that's part of the reason why communication is key. And I think, honestly, communication doesn't need to happen around this topic via email or letters. I think the communication, me personally, needs to be face-to-face, because I wouldn't understand. I didn't understand fully until you all explained it when you came. So I think some things need to just be, you all with the administration sitting down and actually going over options and expectations and level setting. That's just me personally. That was our recommendation, our action item. that happened. Yes, ma'am.
So as wonderful as the Montessori model is, I love Montessori, but everyone does, it's not a good fit for everyone. If they, in your situation, could they choose Woodford or Silverton?
That's been the proposal, and I think it goes back to Chair said months and months and months ago, is that we were showing favoritism if you chose magnets over your own neighborhood. We'll get you to that magnet. That just represents about 20 years of prioritizing magnets. I mean, it's as simple as that. And the 40, excuse me, Carol corrects me, 40 years of that. So we also, now that we're looking at high schools of choice, we also can't afford to have you have a neighborhood school of choice. I mean, because there's 40 neighborhood schools, so if regardless of where you live, you can choose. We can't afford that any more than we can still afford. But the idea that there might be sort of that cadre or that subgroup that would be within a corridor or just within a corridor. It's another reason to think about corridors, where the transportation thing is not so great. The great cost of somebody who lives on the east side, but they'd like to go to, Midway. Well, we have this problem already. We don't need to find a way to compound it, but the idea that there could be this kind of subgroup within, if they're close or it's different program, that's something to think about. We haven't said no.
The other part of my question was how is transportation impacting overall enrollment at CPS? Are people leaving because of well, not this year, but it was horrific last year in terms of high school, Schroeder kids and what have you. Are people leaving CPS because of transportation, and would that make it even more of an emergent situation that needs to be, that pushes you up on the totem pole for what's the priority? Because CPS doesn't want to lose people due to that,
We want to grow people.
Right.
We were one of the few growing urban districts until COVID. We want to get back. We want to dominate the market among the charters and parochial and private. I don't know that people are leaving. If they're leaving because of transportation, they're leaving out of frustration of our inability to deliver it. Okay, and that's bad. What we do know is that it is negatively, super negatively impacting our attendance, especially among our high school kids. Horrible. Because without the extra routes, it's a disaster. But we're getting through it. I mean, it's our new reality. So we have to figure out how to make it work. And maybe this is, all this other stuff might help make it work. I do want to say one thing though about people saying that the kids learning, and then this whole idea that you don't get to learn with your neighborhood friends. If you leave your neighborhood and your 6 friends go to 4 different schools and they all come back to the neighborhood, and it's not the same. I mean, I'm not looking to make anything be 1950s. I think those were terrible times. But the reality is part of the schooling is being able to play and learn with each other at school and away from school and being on the same bus and going back, and that whole stability piece is part of that. If we can at least have that be a resurgence, I think that'd be helpful.
I think I have lots of different thoughts. I don't know if I think that that people are leaving the district because of transportation. I think, as Board Member Bolton shared, that transportation is definitely impacting attendance in a negative way, and it breaks my heart on some real stuff to listen to students say that they waited for a bus for an hour and it didn't show up. And and I just heard this, Board Member Morosky and I went to AWL, and one teacher, it was a group of students, and they were sharing about how they couldn't go on their field trip because the bus never came. It came an hour and a half later, but to them it didn't come, so they couldn't go on their field trip because who's going to wait for an hour and a half? And it bothers me that these are adult issues that impact kids, and we can't seem to get it right. I don't know exactly what the solution is going to be. I think we can make it better, but I think we need to reimagine education. I think that we're trying to make an old model work. This is just Kareem. This is Kareem's soapbox. So this is not anything that the board has said, but we keep trying to fix a model because we want that, because it's comfortable. But we're missing so many kids instead of rethinking how we're going to do this. If you missed the bus, this is Kareem. If you missed the bus, go in there, get on your computer. So we don't lose you. You don't miss a whole day. I think we just need to reimagine it, because this is an issue. It is not unique to Cincinnati Public. It is across the nation, and it is not going to get better from everyone's predictions. So let's stop trying to recreate this wheel and think out the box. That's just me. And it frustrates me.
If I could just add what Dr. Marcus said in terms of reimagining education, and I wrote that down because I think that's a critical statement. I mean, we literally, this ad hoc boundary committee's intent is to reimagine things to make it easy for our customer, which are kids and families. So I like the terminology, so we need to put that in.
I told that to the superintendent before, like, can you just think out the box? Like, if you give us the moon, we will try to make it work. That's how I feel.
Yeah, it's somebody, I was having a conversation with, actually it was a relative. You know how you have these, they say, well, you're a board member, you're supposed to know it all, and I don't. But they said, what we really need to do is to tear down education and build it up from the ground up again, all across the country, because things are just so boxed in. And we have a gem here, I think. I really do believe that Cincinnati, we have a gem in terms of the opportunities that we had to reimagine what we look like as a district.
Yes, ma'am.
God bless you. So I put some money together and sent the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade kids from Taft Elementary to COSI. And the principal was able to go, and along with other teachers. She didn't have all 3 classes by herself. And they had this, the kind of big bus with the bathrooms in it and all that stuff. So they thought they were pretty special. But what Dana said was it was so amazing watching these children look from here to Columbus going, that's a real farm. Look, there's a cow. All the way up. She said they were realizing things that they'd seen in books or they had talked about, and here they were real. And she said COSI was just like, yeah. So just as we're talking about reimagining, Carol and I went to a concert on Saturday night that was pretty damn spectacular.
Yeah.
I have seen, they were better in some cases than some stuff I've seen in Blues Alley in DC. I mean, they really were.
We have some awesome talent in our district, and when you interact with them and you hear them say, adults think, well, you go to one school, you stay there for the duration of it because that's been our experience. They're used to not staying at schools. I mean, we have got to interact with them the way that meet them where they are, and it's just been unfortunate. So okay, I'm off my soapbox, and it is 5:11. We did it again. We're not on. Yes, ma'am.
Because ad hoc is re-envisioning the district.
I agree.
And what really needs to be re-envisioned is the day, especially for high school kids. I mean, Carolyn, I've gone, and I know you have too, Kareem, to Aiken when these kids are doing their work stuff. They need to not have to spend every school day 8 to 3 within the school building. Many of our kids are working. They need to be interns. They need to be apprentices. And it's our school day and our transportation situation that is limiting our kids. And this is sad. You can save this. Well, you all know how I feel about us making sure we have vans and whatever, but it's the school day. Particularly it's the high school day that has to be re-envisioned for our teenagers. It's just critical, and and we have to stop being a remediation district, which is what we are.
Yes. Oh my
We
gosh.
waste those kids' time spending hour after hour of stuff they're having trouble doing, instead of finding out what it is that their great strength
Mhm.
and so on. So
Yeah.
it's a culture change. I think Carolyn, you referring said it's a culture change.
It's a culture change, but it's also, in addition to that, it is a different way to think. It is a different way to think. And we can't lead that charge without young people at the table telling us what they're going through, and these new age families. You know, I finally met a person who has kept their kids out of school since the pandemic. 3 years. I really thought that was just literature that people talked about in Time magazine. I'd never met someone. And this parent was like, oh, I want him to be in his right grade. He's supposed to be in the 3rd grade. And I just looked at him like, are you serious? I probably had the worst look on my face. He was serious. Like, well, we kept him out because he didn't have his shot records and he's just never been back. I've never met someone like that, but he's not alone. He's not alone. So we have got to meet people where they are and stop trying to put people in our boxes, because they've got their own boxes and some of us have no idea what those are. So, yeah, they do. They do. So, yes, ma'am. Go
Well,
ahead.
just thinking about them type of re-envisioning, I mean, you hear a lot and read a lot now about the impact of COVID on just adults who work every day. There is no longer a traditional work setting.
Mhm.
And I have to say, I'm an older folk, but the younger folks are demanding pretty much that they have the option of working from home.
Yeah.
And my thing is, if they can produce, and you know, if they can produce the outcomes, why not?
Yeah.
So I agree. I think it's the same way with education.
I agree.
Yeah.
We've always been trend setting, so we just need to push to be trend setting. CPS, this district has always been that way. So we just need to keep going.
If we're gonna, I was gonna say we're cutting edge, so
Mhm.
let's lead the way.
Let's lead it.
And
That's what I think.
reimagine education, because it has to, and it's so, I'm so glad to hear you talk about the apprenticeships, and I'm gonna be talking about that, not today, but a little bit further with you, because there's some ways that, there are just some other opportunities that would help students be more prepared, you know, and make
I'm
more,
on it.
make decisions earlier that they can pursue and, be effective at, so.
That's my love language. So we won't go into that because we're only on number 2. So, well, we touched them. We didn't. Well, yeah, we kind of did. That makes me feel better. You guys just love me because we're really off topic. But did we talk about? Do you have instructional models for the middle years, Jeremy?
I have some information around middle years, and I think it strays a little bit from instructional models and just modeling middle years in general.
Okay.
As everything we expand out. It's the other PowerPoint, Rob. So if you want to look at in terms of, it's not in the original packet, it's in the 2 addendum sheets.
Okay.
That
Oh, okay. Here we go.
Did I get
Yeah, you got it. This one.
these are very similar to the ones that are in the packet, but these are updated post our conversation a little bit last week.
Thank you. Yeah. You have this? I'll look at it and then you.
So starting on the first page, and
Here,
I'll try to cover this fairly quickly, but it is pretty data. Let me get to the microphone, sorry. The first page is pretty data heavy,
Okay.
but I'll try and cover it
Okay.
quickly, and we can kind of focus on some specific questions if there are. So looking at the chart, essentially what this is showing is it breaks down an analysis of the corridors, assuming we're going in that direction, looking at each one and the options for middle schools, looking at the options for doing a 7th and 8th grade middle school, or a 6, 7, 8, or a 5, 6, 7, 8. So we modeled it in all 4 of the different options across the common grade levels, and looked at the number of students that would represent from that corridor. The top chart represents the next slide. Yeah. Maybe we
I'm
can
gonna
place
pull it
it.
up on the
Oh, so the top chart is based on looking at the schools who currently have a 7th and 8th grade. So if the schools currently have a 7th and 8th grade, that would be our primary target audience in the first model, along with those schools that then the 6th and 5th grade of those same schools. So it's a smaller subset of the corridor, not the entire corridor. So looking across that, you can see the number of students represented for each of the grade levels. Based on our overall enrollment, if we look across the district, approximately 40% of our students enroll in a non-neighborhood school. So whether that's a magnet school, a Montessori school, or a entrance qualifying school like SCPA or Walnut. So assuming those same numbers, we can come up with a projectable, a rough estimate as to the number of students that would potentially be applying to a junior or a middle school that were to be available to that entire corridor for each of the corridors. So that's what's represented in the blue line that says middle school 5, 6, 7, 8, 40%. So if we were to include just 7th and 8th for the east corridor, we could project about 317 students that would be interested in attending. If we were to add the 6th grade, it goes to 346. Adding the 5th grade would go to 373. And then that's repeated across the column for the central and west. Below that, in the area, the gray and red area, looks at the current schools in that we have defined per our refined corridors and what the capacity and current enrollment of each of those schools are. So you can see, again, so in the east corridor, if we were looking at 7th and 8th grade, saying that there would be approximately 317 students projected that would be interested in the middle school. There's not a single school with capacity that you could put that program in currently. The highest capacity number of seats is at Frederick Douglass with 267. Same with the central corridor. The smallest number will be 411. Rising Stars at Vine, although technically is rated with enough capacity at 424 to fit, it'd be very close. And there are some constraints around the physical layout of the building at Vine that really wouldn't be conducive to that amount of capacity, even though that's what it's rated for. No, so realistically, again, and you'll see it's common across all three of the corridors with the current capacity, and based on the numbers that we come up with, there's not a single school with enough capacity currently that would be able to fit the middle school program. So what we would need to be looking at would be combinations of schools, potentially joining schools or overlapping schools to create, for example, and again, caution everything as we always talk about, kind of seeing the sausage being made. This is discussion topics, not planning, right?
Right.
Hear that, public?
Yeah, let's say that just one more time.
Just reiterate that these are discussion points, not planning points. But so if you look in the central corridor at Rockdale and South Avondale, you can see that there is enough capacity at either of those schools to house the students from the other school. So there's the potential there that you could look at a combination to free up one of the buildings for the middle school.
For only a middle school.
For only a middle school. And again, just as a discussion point, not
Way to do it.
Okay, so say that one more time. You said give us the example that you just said.
right. So if you look at the central corridor,
Okay.
the central, the three columns in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
you can see the minimum capacity, if we just did 7th and 8th, would be 411 projected students of interest. If you took Rockdale and South Avondale, you can see their current enrollments are 257 and 294. The current capacity, available capacity, open seats, is 393 or 356. So in either case, there is enough open seats available to hold the entire student body from the other school. So you can move all the students from South Avondale to Rockdale, or all the students from Rockdale to South Avondale, from a capacity of the building perspective, which would then open the other building with a capacity of 550 plus, which would then be enough to hold a middle school based on the projected numbers that would be interested.
So I just want to get clarification. The 393 is not their building capacity. That's how many, it's the 257 plus the 393. That's their capacity of their building, right?
Correct.
Okay. I was like, how do you get that number?
Sorry.
It does not add up. So each of those buildings has the capacity for 500 plus students,
Correct.
which would singularly cover the 411 capacity for 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th.
If we were to go to 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, it would be projected 471. But yes, it would still fit.
Oh, okay. I think I get you. So the 411 is not the, okay. I got you. The
Yeah,
4,
the
7,
4, 11, and 7, and 8. The
include.
yellow would be adding sixth
Ah,
grade.
okay,
Then the blue is, or the purple's adding fifth grade to that.
okay. Does everybody understand that now? Because I didn't. I'm sorry, I was a little slow.
Average the enrollment, are you just looking at it as a snapshot, or are you looking at it over, because
Over time.
enrollment's different next year?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's probably just a snapshot right now.
No, these are actually, and in most of all of our work here, I operate off of our average enrollment over a 3-year period. I
Okay.
kind of average that out so that we can get a fair estimate.
Yeah, we looked at data. We looked at some of that kind of data earlier in this process too. So, yeah, that's.
I think that that's something for next time too, is that talk a little bit more about how you could do middle school with this information or whatever is, and I'm gonna tell you, and I've said it before, I don't think the community wants 7th and 8th grade buildings. We had them, we got rid of them, they were unmanageable 20-some years ago. It was one of the reasons we had FMP. And I think among private schools and among suburban schools, when people in our marketplace think about middle school, they're thinking 4 through 8, or they're thinking 5 through 8. And if you had within a neighborhood, because that's what the private schools have, that's what the suburban folks are having. Oh yeah, that's the middle grades. At least that's my experience, and at least here. That's middle grades. Not, we think of junior highs as they're great feeders for the athletic program, but managing 7th and 8th graders and building all by themselves, it's probably problematic. But in what one?
You don't want her to repeat that.
Oh, sorry.
We didn't say
I just told y'all you did not want her to repeat that. But I think. Go ahead.
But I do. That would represent K or PK8 in 2 different buildings, separating the grades, and also helped our problems capacity-wise are in our high schools.
Yep.
We don't have room for our high schools to have 7th and 8th graders anymore. We're not crowded anyplace else, mostly. So, I mean, that would also take away from the overcrowdedness in many of our high schools to get rid of the 7th and 8th grade, but then put them in a middle school, which is a much better learning model than the K-8. We had to do the K-8 for the FMP, and then the elementary people said, can we get rid of the 7th and 8th graders? And okay, we'll put them in the high schools because they were under-enrolled. But now nobody wants them anywhere.
Well, I'm just because it's 5:25, so I'm gonna
Go for it.
give Board Member Jones an opportunity to. I'm just gonna share. I think 20 years ago we were looking at some different stuff than we are now. So I'm concerned about the 20-year-old perspective. I have to say, be careful how I say that. Sandwiched in between 2 people that are like my mom's age.
Guns, too.
Yeah.
Because I walked the school
But-
in the snow.
I know 50 miles and that 50 miles. But I think that. But I think that that right now we're looking at some differences. I just honestly think, and I really am big on collecting this information from the staff, from the teachers. I want the administration to collect the data, because from what I'm hearing, it is 7th and 8th graders that is the most challenging. Like, they want them out of the buildings, and I have not heard 5th graders. I have not heard 6th graders. I do think 6th, 7th, and 8th is the sweet spot, and that's just from what I'm hearing. It's 6th graders are off the hook in the K through 6 buildings, and 7th and 8th graders are off the hook in the 7 through 12 buildings. And I also think everybody can't teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, so we need them to be in a special place with special teachers. My other concern is, 2 things. If you do it to Avondale, which is my community, you need to do it to the west, to the east, and you need to do it to the west at the same time, not some pilot that we're just going to put all these kids together and we're going to see how it works. We need a pilot on each corridor. And I also want to get the data on transportation, and if we were to take that load of transportation off of the high schools, what does that look like? So now we're transporting seventh and, or, you know, you've got mixed transportation. You've got Metro potentially where we've got the 7th and 8th graders. You've got buses. Are we talking about buses for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders? What does that look like for transportation? Savings going to one spot versus going to multiple spots. That's kind of what I'm thinking of, is if you take that load off of the high schools, you have to have a cost savings. I would think you would have one.
I think we would have to define the policies around it a little bit to really be able to say that, because if you were to create, say, the middle school in a magnet model, whether it was actually a magnet or a different designation, that it covered transportation, anyone from the entire corridor was able to go there, then you're actually going to be transporting probably a higher number of kids than you are the dispersed model that they're currently under, because you have the walking boundaries for the schools, you have the kids who live within the neighborhood or choosing not to, who would then be choosing a magnet or a separate kind of program that could potentially be taken to a middle school that's significantly farther away, so they would add transportation. So there is definitely the opportunity for it to swing either way, and it would really be a function of what policy we decided would be the model for the middle school that would really determine that. I'm
thinking of it if you were not to, because if you were to just look at it from the policy standard that we have right now, and there has to be, let's look at that as a foundation. And because the policy hasn't been changed, so let's look at it right now. Policies take a while to change. So I'm not wanting to do something in theory months from now. I want to look at it from what we have now. What are the financial impacts for transportation of those students that are from these 5 schools or so? You know, some of them are going to be within a mile, so those numbers may be stagnant, but there are numbers. If we pull students from Aiken and we pull them from Hughes, we pull them from Taft, what is the impact to that? So that's my my interest. If we were to take one of these schools and make it into a you know, a middle school, what are we saving? What are we spending?
Assuming that would be a magnet program type program.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I would just
have to have a clear.
Yeah, I got you.
Because that would define within even our current policy.
Yeah, the staffing issue
Would
is
it-
an issue too.
And yes, ma'am.
My brain is on overload because I'm hearing some things that haven't gelled in terms of consistency, what we've been talking about. So I'm just trying to think if this is a question or comment. When we say, I heard us say, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, that what we want is some consistency in programming across all the corridors.
Yes.
What we don't want is for all the communities to look exactly alike.
That's, yes.
Okay,
Same
so
choices, but, yeah.
So, same choices, but, so, and I'll use the example that Dr. Moffitt said about if you do it in Avondale, you have to do it somewhere else. And my question is, do you? Could it look a little bit different? I mean, based on the community demographics, enrollment, all of that. So there could be some basic differences in how these corridors are structured.
Sure.
Or built. That, okay. I just when we say we want them all, because not every community may not necessarily need a middle school, or a middle school that's 6, 7, 8, or whatever configuration that we have.
Well, let me tell you what I don't want. So maybe I should rephrase it that way. What I don't want to happen is that significant changes are coming to a community, I'm just saying this way, that is predominantly African American, along with the gentrification that's going on there, and then nothing is happening to another community, and then we decide, oh, well, no, we're not going to do anything there. So I feel like the West always gets things done separately, and they always get things done second. And we have a huge population of students over there who I think could benefit from that model. I'm not saying that the programming has to be consistent, because that's on the administration. If it's a magnet school, whatever type of curriculum it needs, I'm not saying that. I'm saying if we have a middle school model in the central corridor, we have a middle school model in the east side. And I would love west and east, and I would love for it to be autonomous to the community that's there.
That's my
Yes,
point. That's
yes,
what I'm saying.
absolutely,
Autonomous to
absolutely.
the community.
Yes, not the programming. Or, yes, that, yes, but I just want the impact to happen at,
And I just want to
across
be clear, I
yeah.
wasn't saying because based on the demographics.
Yeah,
I was
yeah, yeah.
saying it for just what you described.
To the licensing in Ohio is 4.9 mostly.
okay.
And so that's an issue versus what might have been mostly 7.12s. So there's just so many cool things to worry about, but I like the idea of the neighborhood.
I like them too. I think that's the homework that the administration needs to do. And now you know where my thinking is as far as transportation impact to if we were to go to a middle school model. It's just me.
I think that's where the people being able to go wherever they want becomes important, so that we don't regentrify areas and then only certain people can go there.
Mhm.
That's not okay.
Yep.
You know,
I just don't want to start something in a process innocently. And then we talked about unintended consequences last time. I don't want us to start a trend that is detrimental 5 years from now. Now, we are 5:33. We are overtime.
The meeting-
So, Ms. Phyllis, I do need to say, do you want to potentially set our dates for June, August, September, and October, and November for our ad hoc? And the reason I say no August is because we only have one board meeting. That's typically in the summer, we kind of don't meet unless you all want to. And then, so it was June 22nd, August the 24th, September 28th, October 26th. That's keeping with the last week of the month theory. And then November 23rd is Thanksgiving. I don't think you all want to come in Thanksgiving. So what about the 16th?
Read those off again.
Yes, ma'am. June 22nd, August the 24th, September 28th, October 26th, November 16th, and then maybe December 28th. That's the last technical Thursday.
Please send those out.
Thank you.
I just wanted to give that to, she was gracious enough to look this up for us before we get out here. So everyone has our tentative times. And we're gonna run those past administration to make sure. Jeremy,
I am not available June 22nd.
okay. What's another day for
We better
you?
not need any maps or insights.
Good thing I asked. Is there another day that's good for you, Jeremy? Because you're kind of our liaison.
Anything after the 23rd, I should be available for.
Well, what about the 29th? Can we do that last Friday? That's after the board meeting. I mean, that last week.
I'll just put it on my calendar when I get them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or do you all want to meet before the board meeting? The board meeting is the 26th.
You mean like before in the day?
No, I mean like before
Oh,
that
before.
date.
We could finalize the report, is that what you're saying? Yeah, we probably need.
So the 23rd is a Friday. That's one day for you.
No, I'm gone. I'm actually
Oh, you're
out
after.
in June from the 9th through the 26th.
Oh, well, dang. Jeremy, you are coming back, aren't you?
9th through the 23rd.
You're coming back though, right? Come back.
Yes,
Jeremy.
yes, I am
Don't
coming
be- No, that sounds like an extended vacation. You can't believe it. Okay. Well, I tell you what. Do you all want to keep the 22nd and we just know, Jeremy, we'll ask you whatever questions we have. I think we have everything. Let's just keep the 22nd. And then if we need anything, we probably won't. But
Can you confirm what happens on May 25th, if anything?
do we all want to still have a meeting May 25th? We actually do have our,
I think we should.
yeah, we actually had agenda
This was the
items.
additional one that
Yeah.
was rich from that. I just
Yeah.
wanted to confirm.
Because we didn't get through, we had so much we didn't get through the last time. So now we still have agenda topics from the last time too. But we'll work on our report, come up with any questions for Jeremy and the superintendent, and then that way we'll know. So we got through everything, I think. Was school safety zones? Did you want to talk about
That's
that?
all right.
Okay, so, oh, ma'am.
You going to other business?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, other business. You all see I'm wearing a green ribbon. Green ribbon means that this is, May is National Mental Health Awareness Month. This week is National Children's Mental Health Week, and tomorrow is National Children's Mental Health Day. So in support, those of you, I said this in the meeting the other night, I've worked in mental health for 40+ years.
85 years.
85.
When she was negative 10.
But the thing better. I just think it's important to reiterate, especially now with everything that's going on with our young people, regarding the difficulty or the challenges they have in staying mentally healthy, that it's a message that we can certainly support. Life is better with you here. And so I would encourage you to talk to your people about it. And we were supposed to have, do we have ribbons out at the front? Or
They were all taken.
Yeah, they were all taken, so
Oh, wow.
I don't have any more, but,
So
okay.
there's stickers, they've added.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Okay. So, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that our public here, and there is a locally, I mean, there is a national suicide and crisis lifeline, 988. There's also, if you go on our website, there should be the QR codes where you can access mental health supports in your area, in the area where you live.
Thank you. Anyone else have any other businesses for the good of the group? You look like you want to say something. Go ahead.
I got a text. So I didn't know if I needed to clarify. Someone from LSDMC texted me and just wanted to reiterate that they were taken aback by the letter from the principal, from John P. Parker, and that they're absolutely not trying to push Montessori kids out of PRM. We do not want to change the boundaries. We want everyone in Montessori to stay in Montessori. It was just an expansion and more options. So somebody texted me, I just wanted to reiterate in case.
I think that wasn't the principal. I think that was like the LSDMC chair. No, you're fine. You're fine. Thank you for clarifying. Anyone else? Trouble?
Trouble too.
Are you good over there?
I'm good. I need to know, when is the next meeting? Because I got confused.
I got you. May 25th.
May 25th.
Yes, ma'am. We will see you all back at 4 p.m. May the 25th. Jeremy, anything else?
Nope.
Okay.
Do we have any, you want to say for sure are on this coming agenda?
I would suggest maybe if the three of us do a draft, put together like Eve did,
Mm-hmm.
just her thoughts, reflections, recommendations for what might constitute a
Okay.
report,
That'd be
that
great.
would be
Okay.
at least a start.
And I'm going to go back through the action items that we had from our
Yeah.
because we actually did have 3 action items that we want to review. The committee will request the administration review the process for magnet school designation for a digital school for Leader and Me in Silverton, and also request the administration to clarify that transportation not be the determining factor of agent designation. So we got a couple of action items that we just probably would need to have publicly clarified. That's it. But all right, well,
Where do we find those action items?
I'll send them to you. It's be fine.
Yes, but I think we may need some clarity on the action item requests.
We can do that. No worries. Okay, we are officially adjourned. Thank you all so much for coming. See you May 25th, 4 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.